It's time to be woke. Take off your shades. It helps see through the smoke. Cause the wicked hide behind the cloak. And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog. What's real, what ain't? Is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the song, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hair of the Dog. I'm Andy Kennedy. It is Wednesday morning. Thank you very much for tuning in to us on the Fridhampton Leftist channel. We are going to have a myriad of conversation topics today. Our main focus today is going to be on the unrelenting COVID situation that is unrelenting because we still have people behaving badly in this space, but we'll get into that in a little bit. We also have some other things to discuss, but that doesn't start until I introduce my lovely and talented co-host, Miss Carrie Barber. Good morning, Carrie.
Hey, good morning, Andy. Welcome back from vacation. And
Thank
welcome
you.
to everybody who's joining us this morning. Yeah, we see the scruff, Andy, like just kind of rolled back in.
I'm going to, although none of the major sports that's going on right now are in the playoffs, I'm going to just describe this as my playoff beard.
Nice.
But that's only until I get a chance to shave.
There you go. Right, which will be at some point. So tune in Friday for a clean shaven Andy.
Oh, Jesus.
Well,
Now,
that'll be nice. But
now I have to somehow find time to shave. Thanks, Carrie. Thank you.
well, you know, and all that copious amounts of free time. But I do want to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us back here at bright and early. Hope you have your coffee, your mimosa, whatever you're drinking this morning. We do want you to weigh in on this conversation. And I personally have some questions that I want to pose to our audience this morning, and I want to see what you think. So I do hope that you will type in the chat. We will see that and we will read them on air. Yeah, let's have this family conversation because, fam, we are in dire straits, and I really want to understand why this is. So I'm hoping you'll provide your perspective. So yeah, let's first I want to talk about I'm going to talk to white people for a second. I am white. I'm obviously white, and so I just want to pass this along. Andy and I did we try to do this every February during Black History Month to talk to specifically white people about how to be good allies. And I'll try and find the link to that as we go through today so that you can maybe review how to be a good ally. And today I'm focused on the interview, the podcast with Jen Perlman that had two of our colleagues, Alfini and CJ, on as guests. And I got to watch part of that segment. And as I was watching it, now I'm not gonna comment on what CJ and Alfini said. I did tell CJ and Alfini that I loved what they said and how they brought it to the forefront, these particular issues, because I think that if you're not affected by something, then it really doesn't matter to you. And I think that particular attitude plays into this larger conversation that we're going to have about Delta and all of these conspiracy theories. So when I was watching that particular episode, that's what I saw. I saw somebody who was clearly unaffected by the need for health care or the need for personal security, due process, all of these things, glossing over someone who was literally talking about death and misery in their family, very real, very dire situations. Like, death is permanent. When did this become a non-issue for us? right? So I just want to say that when I was watching that, I literally felt nauseous because it was exactly what you do not do as a good ally for our brothers and sisters, right? So the situation that we're in now, when we're talking about COVID and rent and evictions and everything else, this is affecting so many people that has become real, particularly to the, I don't want to say middle class, but to a segment of our population who has really not had to deal with it on this level before. It has now encompassed so many of us that it has become real. And it's a situation where we as human beings don't really register a crisis until it affects us directly. But when somebody's talking to you about family members dying, family members at risk every time they walk out the door, when their own situation, their children are at risk just for being who they are, please have some fucking empathy and be a good host, or at least, damn it, if it's not in you in the with the empathy, please just fake it. I mean, just so I don't know, Andy, if you watched it, but I just, when I was watching, I was like, this is a case study in everything that is wrong for white allies when we're talking to people who have been dealing with what we are currently starting to understand, and they've been dealing with it for generations, right? So I was
I,
deeply
yeah,
disappointed.
and I have to echo that sentiment. And I think that I'm not sure that a lot of people know about the backstory to what may have led up to some of this and some of the ill feelings that were happening, right? And I'm not going to, you know, necessarily drop names and say, okay, well, it's this person and that person, and they behave badly in this. But there was incidents that occurred before this that brought out some ill feelings and certainly some tribalized views about how, you know, to proceed. And I'm, excuse me if I used the word tribalized wrong, but certainly, you know, defined differences in how to actually obtain change in the United States under the current system, right? And there is a faction on the left that is, for lack of a better term, married to the Democrats, right? That think that that is really the only way to move forward through the process. And this was all initiated by the loss of Nina Turner in Ohio's 11th. And, you know, it was an unfortunate thing, but the backlash that occurred because of that and the blame game that came out of that was really disconcerting, right? And put a microscope on top of what the actual division really looks like, right? And there's a, you know, our group certainly feels like, not collectively, but members within our group feel that the electoral process is not the way to obtain change, and feel that it's activism and direct action and those types of things that will really generate the change even within the electoral process, right? We've seen that before with the civil rights movement. And, you know, it's hard to tell people, you know, in the French Revolution time that it was all incumbent on them electing the proper politicians in order to make change. It's also the same thing of trying to explain to Haitian slaves that wanted a better life in, you know, Saint-Domingue, that it was all incumbent on their voting in the proper politicians in order to make those changes, right? So there's a lot of a really good argument to be made about the grassroots movement in order to affect change and change the mentality of your politicians so that they start to work for the people instead of the corporations. So that's certainly a something that we can look at as a viable way to make change, right? And so either or side, you can believe what you want to believe, but certainly taking that and starting a war on the left because somebody else doesn't believe what you believe is certainly no way to proceed for a country that desperately needs to change, right? And so there was the sense of what happened on that show, that, you know, the guests had one idea, the host had another idea, and that because of that, there was no bridging that gap, and it had a very, you know, uncomfortable feel to it, and it ended very badly. And so, you know, what we need to do is learn from that, right? I've always said that we on the left have to concentrate on what we have in common, right? Instead of what is different, in order to move forward. And Carrie and I have always advocated a multi-pronged approach to trying to obtain change. And I think that that's all part of it. And you know, it's very unfortunate the way that ended. But hopefully, you know, we can use this as a learning tool to move forward.
Oh, agreed. And good morning, Deborah. Yes, this was on Deb Perlman's Twitter, I think is where I found it. So if you go to her Twitter page, there's a link on there, and you can watch her for yourself. And, you know, take an objective look at it, and see what you think. You know, am I wrong? Do you think that my take on it is maybe not accurate? But yeah, Andy and I, you're right, Andy. We have always, because I've studied military history and the two-pronged approach. Battle of the Bulge is a prime example where that works. And wherever your heart is, whether it's dem enter, dem exit, direct action, yeah, we totally support that. And whatever resources or information you want to get out, we definitely help with that. So that was my opinion, Andy. I appreciate you weighing in. But yeah, we've got so much work to do. And you're right. I'm watching people from outside the US just heartbroken at what's going on here. And we are absolutely laid bare with neoliberal policy and the destruction that it's causing. And then also, and this is the big piece that I want to talk about today, our mentality. And Andy, you and I have talked about this before, where it's been we are indoctrinated into that bootstrap mentality, the rugged individualism, to such a degree now that I feel like, my personal opinion, I feel like empathy has gone out the window. So when you look back at US history, and we look at the polio outbreak, and we look at the TB outbreak, and all of these things that had happened in US history, things that were going on in the rest of the world, our response as Americans had been, we are together as a country. We are strong as Americans. We take care of each other. And we did this together. And you can see this through old news reels and articles where everybody wore a mask. Absolutely everybody wore a mask. And we did it because we took care of each other. It was our community, our neighbors. Now we don't have that. We don't have that at all. And I want to take this in a personal experience that happened with me, because it's easy to just segment it and say, well, we're very much against the government. That's not exactly true in what is happening in the pushback. And I want to explain this just a little bit more, because personal situation that I had yesterday. So for those of you who caught the series that we did last week, I am right now engaged in creating a sustainable farm with sustainable building and low cost building. So right now we're making bricks, literally making bricks, and working on getting this project off the ground. So one of the people that has joined to help, this was a gentleman who was being paid for general labor. And so what happened yesterday was, this is a person who chose not to get a vaccine, right? Okay, I get that. That's fine. I'll respect your opinion. I don't agree with it. But now that Delta has come to our community and not just arrived, but kicked in the door, our ICU beds are completely full. We have already lost doctors and nurses, and by lost I mean they have died. So we're having to bring in experts from other states. These are trained doctors and nurses. Like if you got into a car accident right now, you're going to be in trouble because the ICU beds are full, and they're full of people who chose not to get vaccinated, and they are dying right now of COVID. So this is a situation I'm in now, and I have a hired independent contractor and a new employee. So now I've got to make a decision. And when I was speaking to this particular gentleman, the contractor who has refused to get a vaccine, he is now also refusing to wear a mask. And in the situation we're in, it's not just about COVID. When you breathe in dust, you can have an anaphylactic reaction. So, for those who are parents, we all got warnings about baby powder and infants that they could inhale it and would cause a reaction where they couldn't breathe. Same thing happens with dust. So, when you're making bricks, you've got to wear a mask. And so it was a two-part request. You know, we're wearing steel-toed shoes, we've got our hats on, sunscreen, water, and we're going to wear masks. So he refused, and he was talking about his libertarian ideals where he has a choice. So after going back and forth, and he was talking about these conspiracy theories and things, and he flatly refused. I'm like, well, okay, from a libertarian perspective, I also get a choice. And as somebody who is responsible for other people, you are putting myself and my employee in harm's way. You need to leave. And he didn't like that. He didn't like that the consequences and accountability of his decision had a negative effect on not only his person, but his pay, because he was now out of a job. So, so this is where I'm setting up this particular conversation. Personal responsibility, personal accountability, and why are people so stuck on conspiracy theories, right? So some of this comes from information that he sent me, and he was maintaining the position that I am looking at independent news, and the information that I am engaged with counts as investigation, and it is equal to, if not superior to, 12 years of medical school and residency, and I know more than doctors. So that was his position. So I'm going to go through some of the information he sent me, and let's talk about what it is in the human psyche that needs to believe some of these things, even when, because, you know, I'm an investigative journalist. When you send me some information, I'm going to dig through it objectively. And when I was able to show him, well, X, Y, and Z is not true, here are the foundation documents, here are the pieces that you missed, here is who this person actually is, and they are not representing themselves accurately, he dismissed all of it. Dismissed all of it, and I became a Nazi in his mind, right? So this is the part. Yeah, this is the part that I want to talk about. Why are we so driven to hold on to a fantasy? And so my question to you, and I'm going to put a poll out here, and one of the answers comes from my husband, who is snarky as fuck. So my question to you is, why do we need to believe in these things as opposed to facing reality? Is it fear? Is it apathy? Or, as my husband says, have we had too many warning labels and this is the consequence? So I'm going to pose that out, and I'm going to post it. But let's talk about Delta as it is right now. So Andy, if you wouldn't mind, could you please put up that first graphic?
I would be happy to. Okay, we're good to go.
Okay, so my first critique on this particular graphic, this is where we are right now with Delta, right? So if you're looking at the charts, and my first complaint is CDC is not really publishing the timeline charts the way that they did under Trump. So shame on you, CDC. Doesn't matter if it's a red butt or a blue butt sitting in the White House, we still have a pandemic, and we need to protect ourselves with good information. So please start reporting it the way you did before. People are still dying. So it took me a little bit of time to find a good updated graphic, and this is what I came up with, and this is still 4 days old. So here's where we are. The rate of transmission is lower because we do have some people that have vaccinated. However, we're in a situation where we have to go back to work. Right. And a lot of companies had done away with the mask. Now we're starting to see them come back. We have children in school. And part of my frustration is I have a lot of friends who have school age kids, and we've been talking back and forth. They have to go to work. So the kids have to go to school, right? Because we're not getting paid to stay at home. We're not getting paid to take care of each other and do the most important thing, stay away from each other. So now we have kids who cannot get vaccinated going to schools, and Delta has mutated in such a way that it is affecting more kids than the prior iterations of this virus had. So Andy and I, before we got going this morning, we were talking about how there's a disparity. Like Ron DeSantis is he's the governor of Florida, and he's such an asshole. He was not mandating masks for school kids, for public school kids, but his own children go to a private school and they are required to wear masks. Ron DeSantis has had the vaccine. So here again is an example of a number of people who are saying, because they're wanting to politicize it, that you shouldn't get in the government and overreach and your civil liberties, but they themselves are protecting their families and their own persons, right? So when I was talking to this gentleman, he kept talking about they want us to die. This is all a conspiracy, and they're trying to do population control. And my point was, why are you helping them then? If you truly believe that, why are you volunteering to be on that line that dies? Why? And there was a disconnect. In his mind, getting the vaccine was being a sheep, and he was not going to play into it because that is what was going to kill him. Meanwhile, look at this map. The people who are dying are the ones who are not vaccinated. So I want to make a distinction. I am not talking about the people who cannot get the vaccine, because we know there are a number of people there, and that's why we're trying to get that herd immunity. When we who can get it are protecting those who cannot, and in this case, it's children. So the adults form a nice little protective circle around our kids, right? So help me understand where this mentality comes from, because this same gentleman was also of the mind that Sandy Hook was all about actors and didn't really happen. So again, I want to ask you, is this our inability to deal with the horrors of reality? And so we cling to this fantasy world? I don't, Andy, what's your take on it?
Well, by the way, I just wanted to say hi to everybody in the chat. The chat's going nice and strong today. We have Eric and Holly and Peter and Turkey Day. Turkey Day makes a great point that is asks the question, is COVID-19 transmitted by hair smelling of strangers? Right? I think that's a direct shot at the person in charge, but anyways, yeah, that's a very good point. The chat is jumping and people are weighing in, and I think that's really cool. Good morning to everyone. One thing I did want to point out, we were talking about the bootstrap mentality, and I'm of the impression, and I do want to resubmit to everybody that I am Canadian. I don't live in the United States, so this is me sitting in my chair at the border with my bag of popcorn, watching the freak show to the south. But the whole bootstrap mentality, rugged individualism thing, that I'm pretty sure a lot of Americans think is, a good thing or a defining thing for America. Quite honestly, through most of the rest of the world, is looked at as a liability, right? And I think that there's a lot of fear in the world about how the US political system conducts itself, and the capitalism seems to be unfettered and the corruption runs amok. And I think a lot of people are worried about their own future simply because of this, unacceptance of the actual reality of the situation in terms of COVID and climate change, and the denying of it by politicians and how things are working, and are afraid for their own survival, right? Like, how do we proceed in a world where the richest, strongest country refuses to change, right? That there's really no clear path forward to a more just society, and actually dealing with these issues. And so there's a lot of trepidation on parts of people in the rest of the world that look at that and say, we're in deep doo-doo. And the inability for the Joe Q public, or however you want to call him, in the United States to identify that as a problem or even want to change it, right? So I think that if we start at that basis, there's a lot that we can glean from that in terms of the response to COVID, and how we see that a lot of people are in their own echo chambers, and they only seek out opinions that are like theirs. And when we look at it in those terms, I think it's very hard for Americans to get out of that echo chamber and start to critically think about their own situations and what might actually be their danger, away from the most powerful propaganda machine in the world and the elitist government and media that controls their lives, right? So that's a lot to overcome and handle, right? So I always say that Americans are starting from the biggest hole when trying to understand the world around them, because they have so much against them, right? And I know that's just a general statement, but I think that if you use that as a starting point, I think it gives you a more reasonable idea of why COVID has become such a problem in the United States, because of that echo chamber mentality that we see a lot, especially in the political sphere.
I think that's a very valid point, and that's part of the politicization of it. So there are a couple comments I want to get to. Bader, thank you so much for kind of alluding to what's going on in Australia, and I know that we are exporting our neoliberalism, so please learn from our example and fight it hard, do not stop, keep going. Also, I think it was a dingo, and I forget the other person. I'm sorry, the chat is going so fast, but I want to just step back a little bit and explain how vaccines work. So anyone who's gotten the flu shot, what happens is they introduce an inert form of whatever it is, whatever the flu every year there's one of three that goes around, sometimes two of three variations, and they introduce an inert. It's not live, it's not going to replicate, but they take the material, introduce it to your body. And that's why sometimes when you get the flu shot, it happens to me. I sometimes feel a little off, like I'm starting to get the flu. And what happens is, because that material has been introduced to your body recognizes it and starts fighting it. That's your immune system. And the whole idea behind a vaccine is that when you build up that immunity, your body now recognizes what this virus is and is able to fight it effectively. You are now kind of armed with the recognition of this virus. So if you do get the flu, and if it's passed to you, you respond like that, as opposed to if I don't get the flu shot and then I do get the flu itself, my body takes more time to try to fight it, to address it, and all of this sort of thing. And I suffer the consequences of all of the all that goes with it, flu, headache, everything else. So with COVID, when you're getting the vaccine, you are being introduced and arming yourself to fight it. So like, I have been fully vaccinated, but I could still get Delta if somebody passes it to me. And that's what we're seeing. Sometimes people are getting Delta after being vaccinated. I have a little more in my immunity now to address the issue of getting Delta, and I have a better chance of fighting it. So my symptoms may not be as strong or as dire as somebody who's not vaccinated. And that's what that graphic was showing. So it's not that people who are fully vaccinated aren't getting it. They are. And there was just a news story out last week about this woman in Texas who had an already compromised immunity. She was fully vaccinated. She got Delta and she passed away. And part of that is we're trying to protect people like her so that Delta is not transmitted to everyone, particularly with compromised immunity. These are people who have chronic issues. They've had organ transplants or other things like that. We're supposed to be protecting them, but all of us getting the immunity within our own bodies to fight this virus at the initial instance of it. So that's how vaccines work.
Right.
So
and I'm sorry for interrupting,
in
Carrie, but I just wanted to push back. There's a gentleman, Gary S. Seth, who is claiming that the vaccine is experimental and untested, right? That it's the COVID spiked antibodies, and that's not true at all, right? I want people to remember that COVID is not even 2 years old. The virus isn't 2 years old, right? So when people say that the vaccine is untested, the vaccine is tested for as long as it's been around on people for the effectiveness. Okay. So to say that it's untested, the vaccine's only 2 years old, or the virus is only 2 years old. It's only been introduced to human beings for 2 years, right? It is not live virus. It is a man-made partial part of the mRNA strain of the spike protein. It is reminiscent of the actual spike protein that gets introduced into your body so that your antibodies, your immune system, knows to attack it when it gets introduced, the virus gets introduced to your body. That technology is not experimental. That technology has been around for a number of years. Okay, so let's be clear that when you're going to come here with anti-vaxxer talking points, we're going to push back against it, because the biggest problem in the United States is that people are believing these gaslighting points about the vaccine that simply are untrue. Okay, sorry about that, Karen. Go ahead.
No, you're right. You're right. Absolutely. And yeah, we deal in facts here. So we're happy to have this conversation, and I love the questions and things like this. But yeah, Gary, no. And in fact, the FDA has approved it, and the FDA is just one organizing body around the globe. We need to look at other countries. We have Russia, we have Israel, we have a number of other countries who have followed a similar model, did the same testing. So whatever information you're relying on is significantly outdated at best. So let's make sure that we stick to facts here. And human love, solidarity. You are my favorite person today. First, you're just wonderfully snarky and so on point. And so thank you. Yeah. So this is where we're at, and I appreciate everybody who's weighing in now on the poll that I put up. So if you have not already weighed in, please do so. So let's talk about the fear portion of it, right? So there's that old adage, and this is something that I have kind of relied on to understand human behavior as I was growing up, and it's very simplified, but it goes like this. There's a bear in the woods, a giant rabid bear, and he's attacking our little village, our village that is secluded in this wooded area. And we decide as a group what we're going to do about this bear. We've got to address this bear. Some people say, well, I'm just going to go in my house and shut the door and hope it goes away. And some people say, well, maybe we can appease the bear, give it some food, and it'll go away. And then there's this other group that says, no, we're going to sharpen our pitchforks and we're going to go after the bear because that's the way to address it. So people generally fall in one of those three camps. And I'm not saying that whichever camp you choose is wrong, but I think it kind of illustrates human nature. Which one are you? Are you the one that goes in your house and shuts the door? Are you the one who says, let's appease it? Or are you the one that sharpens a pitchfork and goes into the woods? And I think that's where we're at with this COVID. Like I said, it's very oversimplified, but this is where we're at. And I kind of view our neighbors, the Q conspiracy people, like I get that QAnon began with the club mentality. We know more than you and we're part of this special club. And that's very appealing to people. But now we're in a situation where these Q conspiracy theories are literally killing us. And it's not just putting these Q folks or the conspiracy theorists, or, you know, these ultra, whatever they call themselves, libertarians, it's not only putting them at risk, but if you recall that map, it's putting the rest of us at risk too, right? So again, if you look at our hospitals and our ICU beds, they are full. They're full. If I got into a car accident today, my life is at risk. Not because the medical care isn't up to par to help me, but because we don't have enough resources to help me in that situation, because we're dealing with these unvaccinated people who chose not to, because they chose to stay in their house, close their door, hope the bear goes away, and inundate themselves with misinformation. So this is the next part that I want to talk about, the difference between misinformation and then what I believe clearly qualifies as evil, the disinformation. The two are a little bit different. So let's talk about that. So Andy, if you wouldn't mind this next graphic, please.
You betcha.
Oh, okay. So getting back to the story, my personal experience yesterday, this particular gentleman, very nice guy. I'm not going to say that that he's not a nice guy. Very nice guy. And if he chose to wear a mask, I'd hire him back in a minute. So he was texting me some of the information that he believed proved his point that COVID and the vaccines, it's all a hoax, right? And one of the pieces that he gave me, now I was getting the fire hose of all of the stuff, but one of the pieces he gave me was this Kim Kingston person who appeared on what he described as an alternate media site. So I don't know who Steve Peters is. If you know who Steve Peters is, this Karen appeared on his show, and she represented herself as a former Pfizer employee, pretty high up, and she was making the allegations that the Chinese vaccine had this chemical in it that is poisonous. And she was alluding to the fact that the Pfizer, she mentioned Pfizer specifically in this broadcast, that Pfizer was also using this poison in their vaccine. And he was saying, see, look, they're putting poisons into you. And so when I was looking at this, out of curiosity, and maybe you've seen this meme before, but I pulled up the chemical composition of an apple, a common apple that you would get at the store, the same apple that, you know, the adage, apple a day keeps the doctor away. And you look at the chemical composition of this particular piece of fruit, and I copied that and sent that to him, didn't tell him it was an apple. I was like, which of these would you avoid? And he said, all of them. I said, how can you? You're a vegan. It's an apple, right? So then I showed him how to pull up the patent filed by China for their vaccine. And it's there. It's publicly available. You can find it. So I sent him the link to that. And then I pulled up the patent for Pfizer, which is publicly available. And I sent him that. I'm like, this chemical is not in the Pfizer thing. And his immediate rebuttal was, well, they're lying. Okay, so there's a logical disconnect. I said, okay, well, let me see who this Karen is. So I went back and looked. Karen had not been an employee of Pfizer since well before 2007. She was let go. Her position at Pfizer was in marketing and sales. Karen has absolutely no medical training whatsoever, no science training. She has never worked in a lab. She's never been trained in a lab. She has no understanding whatsoever of the scientific process that goes through. Now, Pfizer, you can love them or hate them, but she had no clinical training whatsoever. She was purely in the marketing field. And having worked at some of these large companies as a consultant in the marketing field, I can tell you, when you're in marketing for a company like this, you're having drinks, you're going to lunch, you're doing that sort of thing. You have absolutely nothing to do with the clinical side of it. So that was Karen's job. She was not an executive. She was nothing of the kind. She was just a rank and file employee. And this was well before 2007 when she was let go. And then she started this company out in Carlsbad, California as a consultant. And so she was still maintaining her relationships with hospitals and doctors to sell pharmaceutical. And anybody who is even remotely familiar with that job, she was making bank pushing medications, right? So that was her job. She has absolutely no business talking about the efficacy of vaccines from a clinical standpoint. So what was she doing? Right. So I went and looked at this company that she started, and it's no longer registered in California. It doesn't exist anywhere. So my cynical nature, because of the work that I do, I'm looking at, okay, so Karen hasn't been in Pfizer for over a decade. She has no clinical understanding. She had a consultant company that is now out of business and has been for the last year, but yet she's going on alternative media to promote herself as a clinician who understands, and she's doing these conspiracy theories. Why? Anybody in the chat want to take a wild guess as to why she's doing this now?
Anyone?
I'm gonna wait for your answers.
Bueller.
Right, exactly. So yeah. And this is where I was like, okay, Karen, and it's ironic her name is actually Karen. Karen's trying to get paid. And Karen doesn't give a
we
shit
have
about
some
your
winners. We have winners.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Deborah. You're absolutely right. Kevin, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And Holly, yes, I agree with each and every one of you. She's getting paid. And we saw this before when you had the Trump administration trying to debunk the math on the election. They trotted out this guy who said he was a mathematician and a statistician, and it could not possibly work this way. And he was very compelling. I watched some of his interviews, very compelling. But then it came out that this guy, not only was he not a statistician or a mathematician, he didn't even have a college degree. He barely graduated high school. He is unemployed, and he was being paid to play the role. Right? So my guess is this is what Karen is doing. And yet, so when I brought all of this back to this gentleman and said, okay, you have put your faith, your very life in trust of Karen, but you didn't check, because I know that I have a lot of practice at tracking this stuff down. Still only took me 20 minutes to find this. And so I was like, was it that you couldn't or didn't know how to track down who Karen was, or did you not try? And immediately he moved on to something else, right? Because this is a person that needs to believe that Karen is right and needs to believe that this line of thought is accurate. So yeah, that kind of bothered me a little bit. So yeah. So do the rest of you know how to find the information when it comes to Pfizer or Moderna or any type of patent? Because they're all publicly available, globally publicly available. This is what Bill Gates was trying to fight. You remember that? They are available to you and you can read it. And some of these chemicals, when you're reading it, I want you to understand, because one of the other pieces on this graphic that we're talking about is out of Australia. They had, I'm sorry, Andy, is that graphic still up?
It is.
Okay, there it is. It is. Okay. So on the other side of this particular piece is out of Australia, there was a scientist who was using a medication used for parasites to see if that would be effective against COVID. And the problem with this came out a while ago. The problem with his study was he was using that particular medication in such high levels that it would literally kill a person. So they were like, thank you very much for your initial review, but on peer review from people in the field, virologists and doctors, they said, yeah, thanks for this, but it's bullshit and we can't use it because you will kill your patient at the same time you kill the COVID vaccine or COVID virus with this. So they scrapped it. But here's what's been happening. In the QAnon circles and in these conspiracy circles and these people who are literally putting disinformation, they are willfully lying and putting people at risk. They were telling people that this medication was effective. So you don't need to get the poison of the vaccine. If you get COVID and the new Delta strain, you could simply treat it with this medication. And oh, by the way, this medication can be found at your local Tractor Supply store as a horse parasitic medication. Let me repeat that. They were telling people to go to a Tractor Supply farm store and take a medication for horses, 1,500-pound animals, to treat for parasites. Do we all understand the difference between a parasite and a virus? Let's start there.
Apparently not.
No. So what happened? People were going to Tractor Supply and they were killing themselves. They were doing permanent damage to their stomach lining, their intestines, because they were taking a medication meant for a horse, to the point where Tractor Supply had to issue not just, and this is at my Tractor Supply down the street here, they had to issue statements posted on the door and a 7-page warning for these idiots. You are not a horse. A parasite is not the same as a virus. This is a very strong medication. You should not be taking it. And shame on you for believing these people who are literally trying to kill you with disinformation. So what's the difference between these people spreading disinformation, trying to make a buck off you, and Ron DeSantis getting the vaccine and telling you no and putting your children at risk? Misinformation, Gary, you're going to be my example. Or misinformation is you posting something in the chat that is not accurate, and then Andy taking that opportunity to make the correction. Disinformation would be you still saying that information to make sure that other people got the wrong information and ran with it. That is, for those of you who are religious, let's step back here. A sin is where you do something wrong. You make a mistake. You do something wrong. But evil is when you do something wrong and you encourage others to do it too. That's the difference between wrong and evil. This also illustrates the difference between misinformation and disinformation. So this is what I'm talking about. It's not just the ignorance of the person that I was engaged with yesterday. It's the spreading of disinformation that is literally killing our neighbors and our communities. And because these people are, for whatever reason, based on the poll, you guys said it was fear, based on their fear, they are harming not just themselves, but the rest of us. And that is where we're at with Delta. It's just incredible to me. So I don't know, Andy, have I got it wrong?
Well,
am I looking at this the wrong way?
if you remember back, there were some people that actually drank bleach. Apparently the people that have taken this new medication for horses, they asked them afterwards how they were feeling, and most of them went.
Thank you for that. Yeah,
you're welcome.
Yeah,
no, this
so
there's just a couple of points that I wanted to make, especially about the vaccine and what's happening. And by the way, I just wanted to say that we just received a super chat for $10. Thank you very much.
Wow,
very nice of you. We appreciate you.
Thank you for that.
HL, I love all you folks. Keep plugging along. You are making a huge difference with the new leftists and exposing the fraudsters, and we appreciate your help. Thank you very much, sir. My first where to go with this? I think that a lot of the people equate the sorry, I'm trying to organize my thoughts in a coherent way, because I've got a lot of stuff that's kind of clouding my mind that I want to say, but I want to do it in a chronological way. Let's remember that the entire anti-vaxxer movement was started by a single document that was put out by a gentleman that was trying to make money by replacing the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine with a product that he had invested in, right? Where they made the connection to autism without actually doing any study. It was completely false. And that has blossomed into an entire movement of people, right? That has now gotten their roots and their hands onto COVID, which is really the main source of the pushback against COVID and the vaccine and all that stuff, right? So we have to keep that in mind when we talk about this, of where this all came from. And so that's the first thing that we need to discuss about this. It's hard because, and let me just tell a quick story, because I think this is relevant at this point. And this happened to my wife, Deb, who is an OR scrub nurse at the local hospital near where we live. And she's been, you know, overworked and underpaid at the hospital without being able to take a vacation because they've been so needed since the entire pandemic began over a year and a half ago, right? And last week in the hospital, there was a woman that forced her way into the hospital not wearing a mask. And Canada, we've been quite good about continuing to distance and wear masks in order to help other people. But she claimed that she had a medical reason for not wearing a mask. And, you know, if you do, you have to carry a certificate that shows why, because you're not allowed to just claim that. And she had told the people at the front that at the entrance to the hospital that she had forgotten the certificate at home, right? So I'm not sure who was there at the hospital, but that, you know, instead of maybe dealing with her, they allowed her to enter the hospital without a mask, right? She was coming into the hospital and going up to the OR for surgery, right? So she made it all the way up to the 5th floor where the surgery is without wearing this mask. She was there for cosmetic surgery. She didn't even have to be there, right? And in a place in the hospital where the frontline workers have had to deal with this in real time directly, right? In the ICU with all the people, and where we live isn't even a hotspot. This was abhorrent to the people in the hospital that are watching this, that have had to deal with this, right? There's a lot of people say that, well, it's a hoax, and I don't know anybody this has ever happened to, and what have you. But to try to attempt to get into the hospital without a mask because you believe that you don't have to wear one, because it's a hoax or whatever, because you think you have a medical reason not to, simply because you don't like to, right? This is beyond anything that I've seen, right? How selfish have we become as a people that you are willing to go into a hospital filled with sick people, some people that are immunocompromised, that probably can't get the vaccine because of their immune system, right? That you're that selfish that you walk into a hospital for cosmetic surgery without a mask simply because you don't want it, right? And that's what that whole story, when my wife told me that, just put a bow on it for me, right? That we have now such a society where we've lost the ability to understand the sense of community, of trying to keep other people safe in society, that we're taught that greed and only looking out for yourself is how you proceed through life, right? If you don't want to wear a mask, that's up to you. But the second you put somebody else's life in danger, that's on all of us. And that's wrong, right? This whole concept of people pushing back against the vaccine, the pharmaceutical industry, I can understand people are leery of it because they are built on profits. And I've said this before, the vaccine was not created by the pharmaceutical industry. The vaccine was created by scientists in a lab trying to help people and save lives. The pharmaceutical industry distributes it on a profit basis. But their whole business model is on a product that actually works, right? It doesn't make sense for a pharmaceutical industry to put out a product that is putting people in danger because it's against their ability to make profits. Ask AstraZeneca how that worked out. Right? So we have to come to an understanding that it's not the pharmaceutical industry that even created these vaccines. They're just the one in place to distribute it. Right? So let's be reasonable about how we feel or what we do to make sure that we keep people whole, because you can't look to mainstream media to help you in this fight, because they're bought and paid for by the elitist establishment that, as we've seen, like DeSantis in Florida, understand what they have to do to keep people safe, but aren't saying the same things to their constituents because they don't care about them.
Right. And Andy, I just want to call out Derek. Derek, that last part was for you, and you obviously weren't listening. There's a difference between the scientists who created it, working with the global community, and the billionaires in the pharmaceutical. This is what I'm talking about. You are so full of your own bullshit that you will not listen. And you are actually putting us all at risk. So here's my final thought, Andy, and I'm gonna let you finish, because Derek, you just fucking got here and you're already spreading this misinformation. In this conversation I was having with this gentleman who I really genuinely like, and I want his help and I want to hire him. All of this, I said, put all of that aside. The misinformation, Fauci and his bullshit, and how is that guy still working in the government? I don't know. I said, all of it, pharmaceutical company, all of it, put it aside. I said, look me in the eye. Look me in the eye. It's just you and I. Just you and I. You know me. Are you really saying that you are willing to put me at risk because you won't wear a mask? And he said, yes. And I was heartbroken in that moment. He said, yes, I will not wear a mask and I will continue to put you at risk. And I'm okay with that. And for those of you who remember in 2014, we had almost eradicated whooping cough. Whooping cough. This is a disease that kills people and you die in a horrific way. You die because you are coughing so much you cannot breathe. Your lungs fill up, you die. In 2014, my son was playing football, and one of his teammates went to California and was visiting anti-vaxxer families. That is where the outbreak happened in California. That teammate then brought it back to Illinois and Chicago, and it spread all around the football team, and I got it. I almost died from whooping cough. And the only thing that saved my life was somebody teaching me how to stop the cough so I could breathe for a second and then keep going. I almost died. 2 infants a mile from me died because that parent took their sick child to daycare and it killed 2 babies. That was whooping cough. And when I explained this to him, he still was unmoved because he was so dug in, like you, Derek, so dug in to having to be right in all your bullshit and fear that you put people at risk. Death is permanent. What is wrong with you that you don't understand that death is permanent and you are hurting people? I don't get it. And I'm still struggling with this because I really genuinely like people. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here doing this. But you are making it so hard because of it's not just an infantile understanding of the world around you, but you hate yourself and everyone else so much that death is meaningless to you. And that's the part that I am really struggling with. So for all of the Dereks out there, fuck off. Get your shit together. And if you don't want to get vaccinated, fine, don't. If you don't want to wear a mask, don't. Stay home. Stay your ass home and take the consequences of your own decision. Be an adult. That is what I'm struggling with. What is wrong with you that you want all the privilege and none of the responsibility? Grow the fuck up. I'm done with my rant, Andy. Please continue and you can take us out.
Well, I mean, I want people to realize that we're trying on this show to convey information, right? And we want to make sure that people are armed with the correct understanding of what's happening around them, instead of basing your opinions and your stances on misinformation, because we know there's a lot of that out there. Okay. And we have to understand that we're just trying to survive this. Americans are looking into the brink of still not having free health care. You know, this moratorium that is eventually going to end, that's going to send millions and millions of people out into the street because of foreclosures, because they're going to have to come up with the money all at once. It's a really tough time. We get that. But if you arm yourself with the proper facts and understand that COVID is a dangerous thing, that you need to be protected from it, because quite honestly, there's a lot of politicians that don't have your back on this. Okay. So our main push for this is to please arm yourself with the information and try to stay safe. I know it's tough in this time of misinformation, of dog whistles and gaslighting, but please look out for your neighbors. Make sure that you're armed with the correct information and stay safe. And on that note, thank you for watching. I know this is a hot button issue. I know that the people are very passionate about this. We're just trying to give the information that we think we understand and know to help people. And we appreciate you watching. On behalf of Carrie and I, thank you very much. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you here bright and early on Friday morning. Bye-bye.
My name is Bob DeYoung, and I represent
We bout that A, bringing the song. We out here, yeah, spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog, we keeping it G. Whoa.